The day Laurence Mowatt walked into a pawn shop on Dundas Street West, he had exactly $43 in his checking account and a silver star he hadn't touched in 11 years sitting in a shoebox under his bed. He didn't bring the silver star. He brought something else, something smaller, something he'd carried longer. He stood at the corner of Dundas and Ossington for almost 4 minutes before he went inside. People walked past him in both directions. A woman with a stroller, 2 university students arguing about something on a phone screen, an older Jamaican man who nodded at Laurence the way strangers sometimes nod at each other in this city when they recognize something unspoken. Laurence nodded back. Then he pushed open the door. The shop smelled like old metal and carpet cleaner. Glass cases ran along both walls, watches, rings, cameras, instruments, things that used to mean something to somebody. A television mounted in the corner played a hockey recap with the sound turned low. Behind the counter, a thin man in his 50s was writing something in a ledger, the old-fashioned kind, like he didn't trust computers. Laurence stood at the counter and waited. The thin man didn't look up right away. That was fine. Laurence had learned to wait a long time ago. When the man finally looked up, his eyes went to Laurence's hands first. That's what people in pawn shops do. They look at what you're carrying, and then to his face. Laurence was 52 years old, broad-shouldered, with close-cropped gray at his temples and hands that were slightly too large for the rest of him. He was wearing a work jacket from his old job. He'd kept it not because he needed it, but because he wasn't ready to throw it away yet. "Help you," the thin man said. Laurence reached into his jacket pocket and set the item on the glass counter. It was a challenge coin. Not just any challenge coin. It was a Canadian Forces coin from the Princess Patricia's Canadian Light Infantry, with a dent on the lower left edge from the night in Kandahar, when Sergeant Laurence Mowatt had dropped it on the floor of a helicopter and it had skidded under a seat, and he'd spent 30 seconds on his hands and knees finding it while the crew chief stared at him like he was losing his mind. He found it. He always found it. He'd carried that coin for 26 years. The thin man picked it up, turned it over once, and set it back down. $20, he said. Laurence had expected that. He didn't flinch. He said, 35. The thin man shook his head slowly, the way people do when they're performing disinterest. 22. It's PPCLI. There's collectors. 25. That's my ceiling. Laurence looked at the coin. $25 would get him through to Thursday. His pension check cleared on Thursday. It was Tuesday afternoon. He was going to say yes. He had already decided to say yes. And that's when the voice came from the back of the shop. "Excuse me, sir." It was a young man. He couldn't have been more than 30. He was holding a guitar case in one hand, and he'd clearly been waiting near the instrument display because there was a price tag in his other hand that he'd been examining. He was looking at Laurence now, not at the guitar, not at the coin, at Laurence. "Is that a PPCLI coin?" the young man said. His name, as Laurence would learn later, was Theodore Asamoah Boateng. He was 28 years old. He was a music teacher at a secondary school in Scarborough, and he drove 40 minutes each way, 5 days a week, in a 2009 Honda Civic that needed new struts. And he was at this particular pawn shop on this particular Tuesday afternoon because his school's music program had just been cut by the board, and he was trying to buy instruments at second-hand prices so his students would still have something to play next semester. He was going to spend his own money he didn't really have, on instruments for other people's children. But Laurence didn't know any of that yet. What Laurence knew was that this young man, this young black man in a teacher's lanyard still around his neck, probably hadn't even realized he was still wearing it, was looking at that challenge coin with recognition. Real recognition. Not curiosity. Not performance. He knew what he was looking at. "Yeah," Laurence said quietly, "it is." Theodore set the guitar case down carefully and walked to the counter. He was maybe 5'10", slim, with the kind of careful posture that comes from years of standing in front of classrooms. He looked at the coin and then at Laurence. "My uncle served," Theodore said. "2nd Battalion. He talked about these." There was a pause. The hockey recap murmured from the corner television. "He make it back?" Laurence asked. He always asked. "He did. He's in Brampton now, drives a school bus." Theodore smiled a little. "He says it's the most peaceful job in the world." Laurence almost smiled back. Almost. Then Theodore looked at the coin again, and at the thin man behind the counter, and something shifted in his expression. He understood what was happening. You didn't need a long explanation. The equation was simple and it was cruel. A man who had served standing in a pawn shop selling the thing he'd carried through a war. Theodore didn't make a scene. He didn't say anything dramatic. He just said quietly to the man behind the counter, "What are you giving him for it?" The thin man said, "25." Theodore nodded slowly. Then he looked at Laurence. "Can I ask what you need it for?" It was a personal question, too personal, some might say. But there was something about the way Theodore asked it, not prying, not pitying, just direct, the way people ask when they actually want to know, that made Laurence answer. "Groceries," Laurence said. "Just until Thursday." Theodore nodded again. He reached into the back pocket of his jeans and took out his wallet. It was one of those slim cardboard ones, the kind you get at a dollar store, held together with habit. He opened it. He had $60 in cash. Laurence could see it, 2 20s and a 20. Theodore took out $40 and set it on the counter. "Put the coin away," Theodore said to Laurence. Not unkindly, just clearly. Laurence stared at him. "I don't know you," Laurence said. "You don't," Theodore agreed. "I'm not taking your money." "It's not charity," Theodore said. I'm buying groceries with you. For someone I just met. People do that." Laurence had not cried in front of another person since 2009, when he stood at his mother's graveside in the rain in Dartmouth, Nova Scotia, holding an umbrella over his sister because she'd forgotten to bring one. He was not going to cry now. But something in his chest did a thing that he didn't have a name for. Something that felt like a door opening in a room he thought had been bricked shut. He picked up the coin, put it back in his pocket. The thin man behind the counter looked between them for a moment, then went back to his ledger. They walked out together. On the sidewalk outside, the afternoon sun was doing that particular Toronto thing, where it's technically warm, but the wind off the lake cuts right through you anyway. A streetcar groaned past on Dundas. Theodore was zipping up his jacket. "You didn't have to do that," Laurence said. "I know," Theodore said. "You don't know anything about me. I know you served. I know that coin meant something. That's enough." Theodore paused. "My uncle. When he came home, the first year was hard. He said people would look right past him, like he'd become invisible, somewhere between there and here." He looked at Laurence. "I don't like looking past people." Laurence didn't say anything for a moment. He was looking at the streetcar tracks, that old Toronto grid, those lines running east and west, everything parallel, everything measured out. "Laurence," he said finally, extended his hand. "Theodore." They shook. "You were going to buy a guitar in there," Laurence said. "Yeah." Theodore glanced back at the shop window. "For my students, actually. Board cut our music program." Laurence looked at him. "You're a teacher. And you still." Laurence stopped. Started again. "You still gave me $40. Theodore shrugged, but it wasn't a dismissive shrug. It was the shrug of a man who had made his decision and was comfortable with it. "I can find another guitar. They have a music program for maybe one more semester without it, but they have one. You needed groceries by Thursday." He put his hands in his pockets. Priorities. Laurence stood on that sidewalk for a long moment. Traffic moving past, a delivery truck double parked half a block up, a kid on a bicycle weaving around it with the confidence of someone who had never once thought about consequences. The city just going about its business, completely indifferent to what had just happened. But something had happened. He looked at Theodore Asamoah Boating, this 28-year-old school teacher from Scarborough with a dollar store wallet and a Honda Civic that needed struts, and he thought, there are still people like this. There are still people who see. "Come with me," Laurence said. Theodore blinked. "Where?" "Grocery store." Laurence turned and started walking east. "You're buying groceries with me," you said. "So come and buy them." And Theodore, without hesitation, without making it complicated, picked up his guitar case from where he'd set it against the wall and followed. What happened in that grocery store matters. Not the groceries themselves, though Laurence did spend less than $40, because old habits, because he knew exactly what he needed and exactly what he didn't, but what happened at the end. They were at the self-checkout. Laurence was scanning items. Theodore was standing slightly behind and to the left, the way you stand when you're with someone but giving them space. An older woman at the next machine was struggling with a bag of apples that wouldn't scan properly. Theodore noticed before Laurence did. He walked over, held the bag still for her, and it scanned on the first try. She thanked him. He said, "Of course." He came back. Laurence had watched the whole thing. "You do this a lot?" Laurence said. "Do what?" Laurence waved his hand in a vague gesture that was meant to encompass all of it. The $40, the apple lady, the instruments for students, the not looking past people. Theodore thought about it. I don't know, he said honestly. When I see something that needs doing, I try to do it. My mother used to say, Theo, you'll exhaust yourself. She was probably right, he smiled. But I haven't yet. They paid. They walked out into the late afternoon. Here's what you need to know about Laurence Mowatt before the rest of this story makes sense. He had enlisted at 19. He had done 3 tours. Bosnia, then 2 in Afghanistan, the second one the one that changed him. He had come home in 2011 with a left knee that ached in cold weather and a way of sitting in restaurants where he needed to see the door. He had worked 17 years as a machinist at a plant in Etobicoke, the best one in the building by a distance that everyone acknowledged and no one rewarded. He had been laid off 14 months ago when the plant restructured, which was a word that meant they hired a firm from outside to figure out how to do more with fewer people. And Laurence had trained 3 of those fewer people before they handed him a severance package and a handshake. He was 52 years old. He had applied to 61 positions in 14 months. He had not gotten a second interview in 7. He was not bitter. He had decided not to be, the way you decide some things. Not because it's easy, but because the alternative is worse. But he was tired. In the particular way that exhaustion is not about sleep. The kind that comes from being unseen for so long that you start to wonder if you've actually disappeared. And then a 28-year-old music teacher who didn't know him from anyone had looked at a coin on a pawn shop counter and said, "Put it away." See, here's the thing about quiet acts of generosity. They don't stay quiet. Not always. 3 days after the pawn shop, Thursday pension check day, the kind of day Laurence circled in his head the way sailors used to watch for land. He got a call from a number he didn't recognize. It was a woman named Patricia from a defense contractor in Mississauga. They had a machinist coordinator position open. They wanted experienced people. They had gotten his name from a reference. Laurence asked which reference. Patricia said she wasn't sure that it had come through internal channels. She said his name had been put forward by someone who knew someone. He went for the interview on the following Monday. He wore his good shirt. He got there 11 minutes early. He sat in the lobby and held his challenge coin in his closed fist, the dent under his thumb, and he was not afraid. He got the job. He never found out for certain how his name had gotten there. But he thought about Theodore, and he thought about how Theodore's uncle had served with PPCLI, and how some networks run deeper and quieter than anyone advertises, and how sometimes the thing you don't ask for is the thing that finds you. He couldn't be sure. But he thought about it. He called Theodore to tell him. Theodore answered on the second ring, which meant he wasn't in class, which meant it was probably his lunch break, which meant Laurence calculated because that's how he thought. He was probably eating something at his desk in a school where the music room was half empty now because they'd lost the program. "I got a job," Laurence said. Theodore said, "Yeah, that's great. What kind of job?" Laurence told him. There was a pause on Theodore's end. "Machinist coordinator?" Theodore said. "Yeah, in Mississauga, yeah." Another pause. Longer. "Laurence," Theodore said. "I don't know for sure," Laurence said. "I can't prove it. I didn't do anything," Theodore said. I mentioned it to my uncle." "I didn't think you mentioned it to your uncle," Laurence said. "I just said I'd met someone, a machinist, a vet, looking for work." His voice was careful. "I didn't know if it would go anywhere." "It went somewhere," Laurence said. There was a silence between them that was not uncomfortable. The kind of silence that only exists between people who have arrived somewhere together without entirely meaning to. "Thank you," Laurence said. "I told you," Theodore said. "I was just buying groceries." The story could have ended there, but stories that end there are missing something. 2 months later, Laurence Mowatt started his position at the firm in Mississauga. He was good at it. He was very good at it, actually, in the way he had always been good at things that required precision and patience and the ability to look at a problem and understand it from the inside out. His supervisor, a woman named Deirdre, who had the brisk efficiency of someone who had no interest in impressing anyone and all the interest in getting things done, told him at his 90-day review that she had never brought someone up to speed so quickly. He had thought about that word. Speed. He had been moving at this speed his whole life. People had simply not been watching. He took his first real paycheck and did 3 things. He paid his rent, which he had been 2 months behind on. He bought himself a proper winter coat, because the one he had was 9 years old, and the lining had started to separate from the shell. And he called Theodore and asked if he could come by the school. Theodore said, "Of course." Laurence came on a Friday afternoon, after classes. The music room was at the end of a hallway that smelled like gym floor and pencil shavings. 3 students were still there, packing up instruments, the kind of kids who stay late not because they have to, but because they don't want to leave. One of them, a girl with her hair in 2 puffs, maybe 15, was playing a chord progression on an acoustic guitar that Laurence recognized from somewhere without being able to place it. She stopped when she saw him. "Don't stop," he said. She looked at Theodore. Theodore nodded. She kept playing. Laurence stood in the doorway of that music room and listened, and the chord progression resolved into something, a minor key thing, tender and unfinished, the way good music often is, the way most true things are. Then he turned to Theodore and handed him an envelope. Theodore looked at it. "What is this?" "Instruments," Laurence said. "For the program. Whatever that covers." Theodore opened it slowly, the way you open something when you're not sure you want to know what's inside. He looked at what was in the envelope. He looked at Laurence. "This is," he started. "I know what it is," Laurence said. "You just started working." "Yeah, Laurence." Theodore's voice had gone careful again, the way it had on the phone. "This is too much." "I disagree," Laurence said simply. The girl with the 2 puffs was watching them now, the guitar still in her lap, her fingers resting on the strings without pressing. The other 2 students were also watching, in that way teenagers have of pretending they're not paying attention when they absolutely are. Theodore stood with the envelope in his hands for a long moment. "You know what my mother also used to say?" Theodore said. "What?" "She said that people who give things away are the only ones who actually keep anything." Laurence looked at him. "She sounds like a smart woman." "She was," Theodore said. He put the envelope in his inside jacket pocket, the same jacket he'd been wearing that day on Dundas Street. "She would have liked you." The girl with the 2 puffs started playing again. The chord progression, that same tender, unfinished thing. One of the other students, a boy with glasses who had been pretending to pack up his trumpet for the last 5 minutes, said, without looking up, "Mr. Asamoah Boateng, is this your friend?" "Yes," Theodore said. "This is my friend, Laurence." The boy looked up, looked at Laurence with the frank appraisal only teenagers can get away with. Then he said, "Did you really serve in Afghanistan?" "Theodore talks too much," Laurence said. Theodore laughed. A real laugh, the kind that doesn't care who hears it. And in a music room at the end of a hallway in Scarborough, with 3 students who had nowhere better to be, and a program that was half dead but still breathing, Laurence Mowatt sat down in a folding chair by the window, the left knee aching the way it always ached, the challenge coin in his pocket the way it always was, and he stayed. For an hour and a half, he stayed. He listened to a girl learn a chord. He listened to a boy work through a scale that wasn't quite right yet, but was getting there. He listened to Theodore teach with the particular patience of someone who genuinely believes that what they are doing matters, which is rarer than people think and more valuable than anyone measures. He didn't do anything except be there. But sometimes, being there is the whole thing. There's a thing that happens in this city. In most cities, probably, but he knew this one, this particular gray and generous city with its cold lake winters and its crowded streetcars and its 10,000 small kindnesses happening on sidewalks every day that nobody writes down. There's a thing where 2 lives intersect at a random point and both of them are changed in ways that can't quite be accounted for. A pawn shop on Dundas Street West. A challenge coin with a dent on the lower left edge. $40 in a dollar store wallet. That's all it was. That's all it took. Laurence Mowatt drove home that evening on the 401, the traffic slow and orange in the late October light, the kind of light that makes even highway driving look like something worth seeing. He had the radio on low. He wasn't thinking about anything in particular, which was unusual for him, because he was usually thinking about something in particular, usually several things at once, the habit of a man who had learned that attention is what keeps you alive. But for those 40 minutes on the highway, he was just driving. He pulled into his parking spot and sat in the car for a moment before going in. Force of habit. He reached into his jacket pocket and took out the challenge coin. Turned it over once, put it back. He had carried that coin through a war. He would keep carrying it. But now when he held it, he would think of 2 things instead of 1. He would think of the men and women he had served beside, their faces clear and specific, the way faces only are when you've been afraid alongside them. And he would think of a 28-year-old schoolteacher from Scarborough who had looked at a counter in a pawn shop and said, "Put it away." He would think about what it means to be seen, not applauded, not celebrated, not fixed or rescued or made into a story. Just seen. The next time you're in a grocery store and someone is counting coins at the self-checkout, taking longer than expected, aware of every person behind them, shoulders drawn in the particular way they draw in when someone is embarrassed by their own need. Don't shift your weight. Don't check your phone. Don't look at the display above their head as if there's something interesting there. Look at them. That's all. Just look. Because sometimes the most important thing a person can do for another person is simply refuse to look away. Laurence Mowatt walked into his building, nodded to the man at the front desk the way he always did, took the elevator up to the 7th floor, and made himself dinner. It was the best meal he'd had in months. Not because of what it was, because of what it meant.